The warning klaxons aboard the Vanguard's edge pierced through the artificial atmosphere like the death cry of a wounded leviathan. Captain Mara Thorne gripped the command rail, her knuckles white against the polished metal, as the ship bucked and rolled under enemy fire. The bridge's holographic displays flickered with urgent red warnings, painting the crew's faces in the color of blood and defeat. Shield generators at 40% and falling, reported Lieutenant Faye KX her 8 arachnoid eyes, tracking multiple data streams simultaneously. The clicking of her mandibles added a staccato rhythm to the chaos. "Captain, we're taking concentrated fire from at least 12 Zethian vessels. They've been waiting for us." Thorne's mind raced through tactical options, each one more desperate than the last. The Orion Alliance had sent the Vanguard's edge on what should have been a routine reconnaissance mission to the contested Kepler 442 system. Intelligence had suggested minimal Zethian presence, perhaps a few scout ships at most. Instead, they dropped out of hyperspace into the jaws of a perfectly orchestrated ambush. The ship shuddered again as another volley of plasma bolts found their mark. Through the transparent aluminum viewports, Thorne could see the elegant predatory silhouettes of Zethian warships emerging from the asteroid field like sharks from a reef. Their technology was generations ahead of anything the Alliance possessed, sleek vessels that seemed to bend light around their hulls, weapons that fired with surgical precision shields that absorbed energy and redirected it back at their attackers. "Reactor efficiency dropping to 60%, called out Dr. Ulvac from his xenobiology station, his tentacles dancing across holographic controls with practiced efficiency. The nautiloid's bioluminescent patches pulsed with stress patterns. "Captain, at this rate of power drain, we'll lose life support within the hour." But it wasn't the technical reports that captured Thorne's attention. It was the massive figure that had suddenly materialized beside her command chair, moving with the fluid grace of something that had never known fear. Vrex stood nearly 3 meters tall, his Cathaxian physiology a masterwork of evolutionary perfection. Chitinous plates covered his humanoid torso, while tentacle-like appendages writhed around what might generously be called a head. His sensory organs, dozens of them swiveled independently, processing threats from every conceivable angle. Vrex was the Vanguard's Edge's premier combat specialist, a being whose species had dominated the apex of their homeworld's food chain for millions of years. Cathaxians could split their consciousness simultaneously, tracking multiple targets while calculating attack vectors with predatory precision. They were living weapons engineered by evolution and refined by genetic modification to be perfect killers. And the first thing Vrex did when combat erupted was sprint to Thorne's side and await orders. "Captain," Vrex's voice resonated through specialized vocal sacs, creating harmonics that seemed to vibrate through the deck plating. "Threat assessment complete. 12 Zethian vessels in attack formation, energy signatures indicating heavy cruiser class. Recommend immediate combat protocols." The bridge fell silent, except for the constant drone of alarms. Every eye, human, arachnoid, nautiloid, and others turned toward this unprecedented display. In all the years of interspecies cooperation within the Orion Alliance, no one had ever seen a Cathaxian defer to another species' judgment in combat. They were apex predators, beings who made decisions based on millions of years of successful hunting instincts. Yet, here was Vrex, the most dangerous individual aboard the ship, waiting for a human to tell him what to do. "Vrex," Thorne said slowly, her tactical mind already working through possibilities. "What would your species' traditional response be to this situation?" "Immediate aggressive engagement," Vrex replied without hesitation. "Strike the largest threat, first use superior mobility to divide enemy forces, eliminate vessels one by one through concentrated firepower." His sensory organs twitched. "Standard Cathaxian doctrine would have us targeting their command ship within the next 47 seconds. And the probable outcome? Given current damage to our shields and the technological superiority of Zethian vessels, probability of mission success 14%. Probability of survival 8%. Lieutenant Faye, KX's mandibles clicked nervously. Captain, with respect, if our apex predator thinks we should fight, perhaps? No. Thorne's voice cut through the suggestion like a blade. Vrex came to me for orders because his instincts are telling him something's wrong with the traditional approach. She turned to face the towering Cathaxian. Isn't that right? For a moment, Vrex's multitude of sensory organs focused entirely on Thorne, a display that would have terrified most beings. When a Cathaxian gave you their complete attention, it usually meant you were about to become their next meal. But Thorne held his gaze steadily, waiting. Affirmative, Vrex said finally. Sensory analysis indicates unusual energy patterns in Zithian formation. Their positioning suggests they are not merely attacking, they are herding us toward a specific coordinates. Dr. Ulvac's bioluminescent patches flared with sudden understanding. A gravity well generator, Captain. If they're pushing us toward a specific point in space, they want us alive, Thorne finished. This isn't an ambush to destroy us, it's a trap to capture us. Her mind raced through the implications. The question is why? What does the Zithian collective want with an Alliance reconnaissance ship badly enough to stage this elaborate setup? Another massive impact shook the ship, and this time, the lights flickered ominously. Ensign Torres at the engineering station called out, "Hull breach on Deck 7. Damage control teams responding, but Captain, we can't take much more of this." Thorne studied the tactical display, watching the elegant dance of Zithian ships as they maintained their formation. They were powerful enough to destroy the Vanguard's edge in minutes, yet they held back, applying just enough pressure to drive the Alliance vessel toward whatever trap they'd prepared. It was like watching a pack of wolves herd a deer toward a cliff patient, methodical, inevitable. "Options," she said curtly. "We could try to break through their line," suggested Commander Parks, the human tactical officer. "Full power to forward shields all weapons on continuous fire. Punch a hole and run for hyperspace." "Probability of success?" Thorne asked Vrex. 3%. Their formation is designed to prevent exactly that maneuver. "We could surrender," offered Lieutenant Fay KX reluctantly. "Request parley under interstellar law." "The Zithian collective doesn't recognize interstellar law," Dr. Ulvac pointed out. "They withdrew from the Galactic Accord 50 years ago." Thorne closed her eyes for a moment, filtering out the chaos around her. In her mind, she could see the tactical situation like a three-dimensional chessboard. 12 enemy ships, perfect formation, herding maneuver, technological superiority capture, rather than destruction as the objective. There had to be something they were missing, some element of the trap that could be turned against the trappers themselves. "Vrex," she said suddenly, "you mentioned unusual energy patterns. Can you be more specific?" The Thaxian's sensory organs swiveled as he processed the data again. Gravitational distortions approximately 47,000 kilometers, bearing 27 Mark 6. Energy signature suggests artificial gravity well, but the harmonics are unstable. Unstable? How? The frequency modulation suggests the gravity generator is operating beyond optimal parameters. They are maintaining a field strength significant enough to trap our hyperspace drive, but the power requirements appear to be straining their systems. Thorne felt the first stirrings of an idea, dangerous and desperate, but possibly brilliant. "Dr. Ulvac, if we were to overload our reactor core, what would be the effective blast radius?" The nautiloid's tentacles writhed with agitation. "Captain, I cannot recommend." "Hypothetically, Doctor." "In a standard overload scenario, the antimatter containment breach would create a spherical destruction zone of approximately 20,000 kilometers. However, if there were external gravitational distortions affecting the explosion, the blast wave would be channeled along the gravity lines," Thorne finished, "focused and amplified." The bridge crew stared at her in various expressions of horror and disbelief. Commander Parks found his voice first. "Captain, you're talking about a suicide run." "No." Thorne said, her voice gaining strength as the plan crystallized in her mind. "I'm talking about something much more interesting." She turned to the ship's AI interface. "Computer display reactor core specifications and current power output." The holographic display shifted, to show the Vanguard's Edge's antimatter reactor, a marvel of engineering that provided power for everything from life support to the hyperspace drive. Current output showed 93% of maximum safe operating parameters. Vrex. Thorne said, "I need you to prepare for something that's going to go against every combat instinct your species has developed. Instead of running away from the trap, we're going to run straight into it." The Cathaxian's sensory organs focused on her again, and she could almost feel the weight of his predatory intelligence analyzing her words. "Explain." "The Zithians have created an artificial gravity well to prevent our escape. But they've made a crucial error. They've built their trap too close to their own ships. If we can destabilize our reactor core at precisely the right moment, the explosion will be channeled along their gravity lines directly back at them. The timing would have to be perfect." Dr. Ulvac observed his patches pulsing rapidly. "Too early and the explosion dissipates. Too late and we're pulled apart by tidal forces before we can detonate." "Which is why I need Vrex," Thorne said. "Cathaxian reflexes are the only thing fast enough to manage the reactor controls during gravitational shear. But it means trusting my judgment over his predatory instincts." Vrex was silent for a long moment, his sensory organs processing threat calculations at superhuman speed. Finally, he spoke. "Your plan requires precise coordination between species with vastly different reaction times and thought processes. The probability of successful execution is—" "Don't tell me the odds," Thorne interrupted. "Tell me if you trust my tactical judgment." Another impact shook the ship and, this time, the artificial gravity fluctuated, sending loose objects floating briefly before crashing back down. They were running out of time. Either they acted now, or the Zithians would complete their herding maneuver and drag them into whatever fate awaited captured Alliance vessels. "I trust your judgment, Captain," Vrex said simply. The words carried weight that went far beyond military protocol. For a Thaxian to place their survival in the hands of another species was unprecedented in recorded history. It represented a fundamental shift in how apex predators related to other forms of intelligent life. "All right, people," Thorne announced to the bridge crew. "Here's what we're going to do: engineering. I need you to begin controlled destabilization of the reactor core. Not an emergency shutdown. I want the containment field weakened gradually. We need to look like we're having cascade failures." Ensign Torres looked pale. "Captain, if we get the timing wrong—" "We won't," Thorne said with more confidence than she felt. "Vrex will be monitoring the gravitational distortions and managing the final detonation sequence. Dr. Ulvac, I need continuous readings on the Zithian gravity well. Any fluctuation in their field strength, I want to know about it immediately." "And if they realize what we're doing?" asked Lieutenant Fay KX. "Then we die fighting instead of dying in captivity," Thorne replied grimly. "Helm set course directly for the gravity well. Maximum impulse power." The helmsman's hands trembled slightly as he input the coordinates. "Course laid in, Captain." "Vrex, are you ready?" The Cathaxian moved to the engineering console, his multiple appendages interfacing with the controls in ways human hands never could. "Reactor control established. Awaiting your command." Thorne took a deep breath and settled into her command chair. Through the viewports, she could see the Zithian ships adjusting their positions, clearly surprised by the Vanguard's Edge's sudden course change. They had expected their prey to continue running, not turn, and charge directly into the trap. "Execute!" The ship lurched forward as the impulse engines engaged at maximum output. Behind them, Zithian vessels scrambled to adjust their formation, some breaking off to pursue, while others maintained their positions around the gravity well. It was exactly the kind of confusion Thorne had hoped for. "Reactor core temperature rising," reported Vrex, his voice unnaturally calm. "Containment field integrity at 87% and falling." "Zithian vessels are moving to intercept," called out Lieutenant Fay KX. 3 ships breaking formation to pursue us." "Let them come," Thorne said. "The closer they get to the gravity well, the better this works for us." The pursuing Zithian ships opened fire, their weapons significantly more accurate, now that the Vanguard's edge was following a predictable trajectory. The ship's remaining shields flared and sparked under the concentrated assault, and warning lights cascaded across every control panel. "Shield integrity at 15%, announced Commander Parks. "Hull breaches on multiple decks." "Gravitational distortions increasing," Dr. Olvac reported. "We're approaching the outer edge of their gravity well." Thorne could feel it now, a subtle wrongness in the way objects fell, the way the artificial gravity system struggled to maintain normal orientation. They were entering a region of space where the fundamental forces that held reality together had been twisted into an unnatural configuration. "Reactor core containment at 60%, Vrex announced. "We are approaching the point of no return." Through the viewports, the gravity well generator became visible, a massive Zithian construct that looked like a mechanical spiderweb stretched between several asteroids. Energy patterns danced along its framework, creating the distortions that trapped ships like flies in amber. It was beautiful in its own alien way, and absolutely terrifying in its implications. "All Zithian vessels now within optimal blast radius," Lieutenant Faye KX reported, her voice tight with controlled fear. This was the moment. Thorne could feel the weight of decision pressing down on her, like the gravity well itself. If she was wrong, if her calculations were off by even a few seconds, they would all die for nothing. But if she was right... Vrex status on reactor destabilization. "Containment field at 40% and falling. Recommend detonation in 30 seconds. 30 seconds. Thorne watched the tactical display as the Zithian ships continued their pursuit, drawn by their own momentum and the certainty of their trap directly into the blast zone. The pursuing vessels had closed to within 20,000 kilometers well, within the expanded destruction radius that the gravity well would create. 20 seconds, Vrex announced. The ship groaned around them as gravitational forces began to tear at the hull. Warning alarms reached a crescendo that made conversation nearly impossible. On the main display, the Zithian gravity well generator loomed larger and larger, its alien architecture filling the screen. 10 seconds. Thorne gripped her command chair and prepared to give the order that would either save them all or destroy them. But before she could speak, Vrex's voice cut through the chaos. "Captain, I am detecting additional energy signatures. The Zithians are not merely generating a gravity well, they are creating a dimensional fold. This is not a capture device. It is a gateway." The revelation hit Thorne like a physical blow. A dimensional gateway would explain everything: why the Zithians wanted the ship intact, why they had risked such an elaborate ambush, why they were willing to deploy their most advanced technology in a supposedly insignificant star system. They weren't trying to capture the Vanguard's edge for its tactical value. They were trying to send it somewhere else entirely. 5 seconds to optimal detonation, Vrex announced. But now, Thorne hesitated. If the Zithians were opening a dimensional gateway, destroying it might have consequences far beyond this single battle. They could be collapsing a passage between star systems, or worse, creating a rift that could destabilize local spacetime. "Captain," Commander Parks shouted over the alarms, "we need to decide now." Thorne closed her eyes and made the hardest decision of her career. Not the decision to detonate the reactor that had been made minutes ago. The hard decision was to trust in the adaptability that had brought humanity to the stars, the flexibility that had allowed them to build alliances with species that should have seen them as prey. "Vrex," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos with absolute authority, "execute detonation, but channel the explosion through our deflector array. I want a controlled release, not a spherical blast." "Understood." Vrex's appendages moved with inhuman speed across the reactor controls, his Thaxian nervous system, processing information and making adjustments faster than any other species could follow. The reactor core reached critical instability. Antimatter containment failed in a precisely controlled cascade, and the explosion that should have destroyed everything within 20,000 kilometers was instead focused into a coherent beam of energy that lanced directly into the heart of the Zithian gravity well generator. The result was spectacular. The alien construct designed to bend spacetime itself could not withstand the sudden input of raw antimatter energy. Its delicate framework collapsed in a cascade of quantum distortions that propagated outward, like ripples in a pond. But instead of simply destroying the device, the feedback created exactly what Thorne had hoped for, a controlled dimensional fold that opened directly behind the Zithian fleet. The pursuing vessels caught between their own momentum, and the sudden appearance of a spatial rift had no choice but to be drawn into the gateway they had created. One by one, the sleek Zithian ships vanished into the dimensional fold, their perfect formation dissolving into chaos as they were pulled into whatever realm lay beyond. The Vanguard's edge, its reactor now safely shut down, drifted in the sudden silence of empty space. The gravity well was gone, the Zithian fleet was gone, and they were alive. "Damage report," Thorne said quietly. "Hull breach is sealed," reported Ensign Torres, his voice shaky, but professional. "Life support stable. Reactor core offline but cooling normally. We're going to need a full refit, but we're space-worthy. Casualties. Minor injuries only, Captain. Medical teams are responding." Thorne slumped back in her command chair, feeling the weight of exhaustion settling over her like a heavy blanket. Around the bridge, her crew was beginning the slow process of recovery, checking systems and treating wounds. But her attention was focused on Vrex, who remained at the engineering station, his sensory organs still tracking phantom threats. "Vrex," she said softly. The Cathaxian turned toward her, and for the first time since she had known him, his predatory intensity seemed to have diminished. "Yes, Captain. Why did you come to me for orders? Your species has never needed guidance from others in combat situations." Vrex was quiet for a long moment, his multiple eyes focusing on distant stars, visible through the viewport. When he finally spoke, his voice carried harmonics she had never heard before, something that might have been contemplation, or even respect. In the first moments of the attack, he said, "My combat instincts analyzed 1,237 possible response scenarios. In every simulation that followed traditional Cathaxian doctrine, we died. But when I observed your behavior patterns, your tendency to seek non-obvious solutions, I realized that survival might require abandoning instinct in favor of innovation. And now I understand why humans have succeeded in building alliances across so many species. You do not rely on the strengths evolution gave you. You create new strengths by learning from others." Vrex paused, his sensory organs swiveling to take in the mixed species crew around them. "This is why I came to you for orders, Captain. Because sometimes the apex predator must learn from the prey." The statement sent ripples of surprise through the bridge crew. Dr. Ulvac's bioluminescent patches flared with scientific curiosity, while Lieutenant Faye KX's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. But Thorne found herself thinking about larger implications. For centuries, each species in the Orion Alliance had operated according to their own evolutionary strengths. Humans brought adaptability and innovation. Cathaxians provided unmatched combat prowess. Arachnoids offered multidimensional perception. Nautiloids contributed scientific analysis. But they had always remained fundamentally separate, cooperation born of necessity rather than genuine integration. What Vrex had demonstrated in the heat of battle was something entirely different, the willingness of an apex predator to recognize that strength could come from unexpected sources. It suggested possibilities for interspecies cooperation that went far beyond simple military alliances. "Captain," Lieutenant Faye KX announced, "I'm receiving priority communications from Alliance Command. They want a full report on our encounter with Zithian forces." Thorne nodded wearily. There would be debriefings and analysis, tactical assessments, and strategic implications. The discovery that the Zithians were experimenting with dimensional gateway technology would send shockwaves through Alliance intelligence. But that was a concern for later. Commander Parks set course for the nearest Alliance station. "Best speed the engines can manage." She paused, looking around at her crew. and put together a commendation list. Everyone on this bridge performed above and beyond expectations today. As the Vanguard's edge limped away from the debris field that had once been a Zethian ambush, Thorne found herself reflecting on the day's events. They had faced impossible odds and survived not through superior firepower or technological advantage, but through the kind of creative thinking that emerged when different species pooled their unique perspectives. More importantly, they had discovered something about interspecies cooperation that military planners and xenobiologists had been trying to understand for decades. True alliance wasn't about each species contributing their natural strengths to a common cause. It was about being willing to transcend those natural limitations by learning from others. The image of Rex, the ultimate predator, running to a human for orders, would become legendary in Alliance military circles. Not because it was amusing or unexpected, but because it represented a fundamental shift in how apex species related to the galaxy around them. It showed that even the most dominant life forms could recognize wisdom in seemingly weaker allies. 3 weeks later, as the Vanguard's edge underwent repairs at Starbase Meridian, Thorne received an official communication from Alliance High Command. The tactical innovations demonstrated during the Zethian encounter were being incorporated into fleet-wide training protocols. More significantly, the Alliance was implementing new multi-species command structures based on adaptive leadership principles, rather than traditional hierarchical dominance. But the communication that meant the most to her came from an unexpected source. The Cathaxian High Council, the secretive governing body that had never acknowledged other species as equals, sent a formal recognition of her tactical leadership. The message was brief and written in the complex harmonic language that few non-Cathaxians could understand, but the translation was clear. The prey teaches the predator. This is wisdom. Vrex found her in the observation lounge. As she was reading the message, his imposing figure moving with characteristic silence across the deck. He had requested transfer to permanent assignment aboard the Vanguard's edge, a decision that had surprised everyone except Thorne herself. "Second thoughts?" she asked as he approached. "None whatsoever," Vrex replied, settling his massive frame into a reinforced chair designed to accommodate his physiology. "I have been considering the tactical implications of our encounter with the Zethians. And the dimensional gateway technology suggests they have capabilities we barely understand. Their willingness to risk such advanced assets in an ambush indicates strategic objectives beyond simple territorial expansion." Vrex's sensory organs swiveled to focus on the stars visible through the lounge's windows. "We will encounter them again, Captain. And when we do, traditional combat doctrines will be insufficient." Thorne nodded. She had reached the same conclusion herself. The Zethian collective was clearly planning something that went far beyond the border skirmishes and resource conflicts that had characterized their relationship with the Alliance. The dimensional gateway technology opened possibilities for strategic mobility that could fundamentally alter the balance of power in the galaxy. "Which is why the Alliance needs more crews like ours," she said. "Mixed species teams that can think beyond the limitations of any single evolutionary background." "Agreed. But such cooperation requires more than military necessity. It requires—" Vrex paused, searching for words in a language that had never been designed to express concepts of interspecies equality. "Trust." The word hung in the air between them, carrying weight that went far beyond its simple definition. Trust was not something that came naturally to apex predators. It was not an emotion that had been selected for in species that had clawed their way to the top of their respective food chains. But it was Thorne realized the foundation upon which true alliance could be built. The first thing the apex predator did in combat was run to the human for orders, she said, quietly repeating the phrase that had already become something of a legend among Alliance crews. "Yes," Vrex acknowledged. "And it was the most tactically sound decision I have ever made." Outside the observation lounge, the Vanguard's edge continued its repairs, preparing for whatever missions lay ahead. The ship itself, had become a symbol of something new in the galaxy, a place where species that had never been meant to cooperate could forge bonds strong enough to face any challenge. The crew that had survived the Zithian ambush was already different from the one that had entered the Kepler 442 system. They had learned to see beyond their own evolutionary limitations, to trust in strengths they had never possessed individually. They had become something greater than the sum of their parts. And in a galaxy where ancient species jealously guarded their dominance and new threats emerged from the darkness between stars, that lesson might be the key to survival itself. The apex predator had learned to seek guidance from those it had once seen as prey. In doing so, it had discovered that true strength lay not in dominance, but in the wisdom to recognize when someone else might know a better way. The stars outside the observation lounge seemed brighter somehow, as if the universe itself approved of this small step toward understanding. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Zithian dimensional technology, ancient alien artifacts or threats, not yet imagined, they would face them together. Predator and prey, dominant and adaptable evolution and innovation working in harmony. Captain Mara Thorne smiled as she watched a supply shuttle dock with the Vanguard's Edge, its crew, a mix of humans, Cathaxians, arachnoids, and a dozen other species. The galaxy was vast and full of dangers, but it was also full of possibilities. And sometimes, the most important victories were won not through superior firepower or advanced technology, but through the simple recognition that everyone had something to learn from everyone else. Even apex predators, it turned out, could benefit from running to someone else for orders, especially when that someone had learned to see solutions where others saw only problems and opportunities where others saw only obstacles. In the end, that might be humanity's greatest contribution to the galactic community, not their technology or their ambition, but their stubborn insistence that there was always another way to look at things. The Vanguard's Edge would fly again, carrying its mixed crew into the unknown reaches of space. And when they encountered their next impossible situation, they would face it the same way they had faced the Zithian ambush, together with trust, innovation, and the hard-won understanding that survival often required abandoning instinct in favor of wisdom. The apex predator had learned to seek guidance. In doing so, it had discovered that evolution was not a destination but a journey, and that the next step in that journey might require leaving the familiar comfort of the top of the food chain in favor of something far more challenging and infinitely more rewarding: true equality among the stars.